On Blues Radio International, we continue our antiviral world tour with a visit to St. Petersburg and my friend, astronaut Nicole Stott.
Yeah.
Nicole, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, nice to be here with you.
I thought that as we began this extended lockdown we're all experiencing, that talking to you is a pleasure, of course, anyway. But I thought if there's anyone who can tell us about living in a confined space and coming up with creative things to do, despite not being able to go out to all the places you normally go, you'd be the one to tell us about that. So, how are things there?
I'm great, actually. I'm really fortunate to be with my family, my husband and son here, and our two dogs that are strategically located at my feet here. And my mom and sisters and their families are just right up the road in Palm Harbor and Tarpon Springs. And while we're not meeting up and seeing each other, there's something comforting about having them close by that way too, where if we needed to, we could get to them. And yeah, and thankful for the beautiful Florida weather that we've had recently too.
I wanted to go back to the beginning and find out how you ended up in the space program. Was this something you always wanted from an early age, or is this something that just happened along the way?
I think I always found it interesting. I am old enough that I watched that first moon landing with my family. I have vivid memory of that, sitting in front of the TV with a grilled cheese sandwich for some reason. And then, later going out and looking at the moon and thinking about people there. And I think at even, 6 or 7, you understand that that's an extraordinary thing to see happen. And then I really credit it, though, to parents that shared what they loved with me. Really, my mom, very creative person, sewed all our clothes growing up. I mean, I can't even imagine doing that now. And if I needed to get to ballet, or if she was taking a macrame or pottery class or hook rug kind of thing, which was going on in the 60s and 70s, I mean, she would take us with her to that. And so had the chance to experience some very creative things. But then my dad, he enjoyed building and flying small airplanes. So, a good deal of my life growing up was spent out at the local airport in Clearwater. And I think that had a huge influence on me because it was kind of that first time of separating from Earth and seeing it in a new way. And back when I was a kid, I thought about that more like, oh my gosh, look at, Clearwater, the rival towns, Clearwater and Largo. Wow, they're not that far away. And look at the little cars. And, the thing we all do when we get, hopefully everybody gets a chance to fly at some point and see Earth that way. And that just led me to wanting to know how things fly. I discovered this thing called aeronautical engineering. And then honestly, if you want to know how airplanes fly, why would you not want to know how rocket ships fly? And went to school at Embry-Riddle over, across the state, right up the road from the Kennedy Space Center. And of course, all that space stuff was going on as I was growing up, as they were getting back to flying and starting with the space shuttle program. And it just, I don't know, it just seemed like this natural thing that why wouldn't anybody want to at least work in that business, right? But the astronaut thing, that was much later, considering that
You,
that was
you,
something I,
you were deeply involved in the space program before that, and you had
yeah.
a number of responsibilities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was great. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree from Embry-Riddle in Daytona, I had applied to a number of different places, like we all do. We kind of spatter out the resumes to the different space industry people. And I had put my application at the time for NASA at the Kennedy Space Center. That was really and truly was my dream job, to be an engineer there. And they were on a hiring freeze. Fortunately, I mean, I really think of this as, how things in life where the thing you want, you don't get it, and then something else comes along that you didn't really know was going to be this really wonderful thing. And I've had those things, and I try to recognize them in life as they happen. But I hired on at Pratt and Whitney down in West Palm Beach and ended up working there for about a year and a half on these really advanced engine design things. I mean, we were off in the super top secret building where you didn't know if it was night or day outside. And that was a really cool experience because there were really interesting things going on. But I also discovered that I was not the engineer that wants to be at the computer or doing, I mean, I think what a lot of people would consider engineering really to be, the nuts and bolts of the equations and stuff of how a turbine blade works. That I discovered that wasn't me. And I became very thankful that there were people around me that loved that. But I ended up at Kennedy Space Center as an engineer, young engineer in the orbiter processing facility, which is this. There were these three hangars where you would roll the orbiter or the airplane looking part of the space shuttle into, and all the work would get done on it to go to space. And I started out in there with a group of young engineers. This was after Challenger, and they were getting cranked up again. And I swear, the 10 years that I was there, I felt like I was getting to see every aspect of how we prepare a spaceship to get ready to fly. And so I, did work in the orbiter processing facility, was out at the launch pad, was in the launch control center, was in operations, was in engineering, all of it, and really got to know the way the people work there, how space is a passion. It's not just a job, I think. And developed this trust in these people that the care and feeding of these spacecraft is what they really felt like their role was. It's great to be part of something like that.
Was it unusual to be involved in that many roles at once? Were people, was that typical to be rotating around? And because the wealth of experience you had in a variety of settings sounds very unusual to me, as opposed to being pigeonholed into one role.
Well, there was opportunity to be pigeonholed if you wanted, I think. I know people, some of my colleagues and friends they're still over at Kennedy Space Center, and they're essentially doing the same thing they were doing when we hired on, at a different level, of course, but because they love it, they love it and they enjoy it. But what I really liked was there was opportunity within NASA, within the space shuttle and the space station program, to get around to different jobs and really see how everything worked if you wanted to. And back then, I don't know if it's the same in the engineering world now or not, but so this was late 80s and through like late 90s, that I had friends that I went to school with who they started a job at a company doing something, in the engineering world. And then 3 years later, they were moving to another company, not within their company. They were moving to a whole nother company to get some new experience that they couldn't get at that place where they were. And for growth as well. But within the space shuttle program and the space station program, there was so much opportunity just across that program to do that you didn't need to leave NASA to do it. And that was cool. I think about being out on the runway after landing and helping get the shuttle back to the hangar, to the OPF, or being in the launch control center and be able to turn around and look out the window and see launch, and to be experiencing all that with the people that were making it happen was just so cool. And I feel like it was the best preparation for ultimately strapping into one of those things and, and understanding kind of the background to it.
How did that first come about? When did you first realize that it might be something you wanted to do or possible, or how did that happen?
Well, I think I always thought it was just really cool, this idea of humans in space. And as I went through school and then certainly with the job at NASA, I started to discover that this is more than just something that's cool. This is something that's ultimately about improving life on Earth. Everything we do in space, even when we're talking about going off to Mars, it's ultimately about improving life on Earth. And I think that was kind of when I started to realize that, I think that was kind of the point where I'm like, man, this is something that I maybe should consider, at least put my name in the hat for. But that took a lot because I almost self-doubted myself right out of it. No one ever told me I couldn't do it, which I'm thankful for. But I always thought, wow, astronaut, that's something other special people get to do. Why should I ever, think they would pick me for this? And I'll tell you, after working at KSC or Kennedy Space Center for 10 years, and maybe I'm slow, but, finally seeing astronauts come through, we were getting the vehicles ready for them to fly, and realizing that, wow, 99.9%, maybe more of an astronaut's job is not flying in space. It's down here on Earth. It's training. It's helping other people get ready to fly. It's working on new programs, all these different kinds of things. And, at least 85% of it was a lot like what I was doing already as a NASA engineer. And so that at least got me thinking, maybe I could think about this. And the key for me was people that I considered to be my mentors, that I worked with and that I worked for at Kennedy, reaching out to them. And all they did, really, in hindsight, I think about all they did was say, Nikki, you got to pick up the pen and fill out the application. And I am so thankful to them, because what in all that whole process of what we don't have any control over in being selected to be an astronaut, the one thing we have control over is this, picking up the pen. And I think there's a lot of that stuff in life where we either self-doubt out of it or whatever, and we don't do the one thing that we have total control of. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely true. I've written books, and people ask me, how do I get published? I said, the first step is to write a book.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make the rest easy, but it's true. And I think that's an inspiration for all of us, however big the mountain seems to be. If you don't take the first step, there's no chance you'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So how did it go from there? You filled out the application, and then what happens next?
I did fill out the application, and I very fortunately got an interview the first time. And I think back at that now, and it's kind of like with every step of the way, you take that first step of the way, but you don't ever think the next step's going to happen, right? That you'll get the call for an interview or you'll get selected. And I did get an interview, and I went at that time. The way NASA did it was they would narrow it down from however many thousands of applications they got. They would narrow it down to, 100, maybe 200, I think was the most they'd bring it down to. And then they bring you in groups of 20 to come to Johnson Space Center, where the astronaut corps is based. And they bring you in, and you'd be there for like a week together as this group, going through different sessions of, seeing a little bit about the Space Center there, going and most of it was medical testing, quite honestly, was the best physical you'll ever get in your life. And you learn things about yourself that you may never have. I have a friend who learned they only had one kidney by going through this, which was a very good thing to find out. But it's mostly medical. And then there's like an hour of interview where you're around this, sitting at the corner of this big, huge table with like 20 people from different areas, including the leadership for the astronaut office. And you have a one-on-one conversation. And a lot of people think that's the interview, but that whole week is the interview. And now they bring the candidates in for like 3 days at a time, and then they bring you back again if they're interested in you. Back in the olden days, it was this 1 week, and then you found out several months later whether you were selected or not. But what I like to tell people is that hour, that's part of the interview, but that whole time you're there is part of the interview. Even unofficially, you're going to go encounter the people that work in the flight medicine office who have worked there since some of them have worked there since the first astronauts, came to training. And they want to know that you're going to be a good candidate. And the person in the cafeteria wants to know you're going to be a good candidate. And all the other people that you're encountering along the way. And if you're a jerk to them and you're only nice to the people around the table, it doesn't serve you well. I'm throwing that out there because as we're in the middle of this astronaut application process again, where people can apply, there's things you need to discover about yourself too before you go and do something like that. And that's one of them. You need to be nice to everybody, always. Just needs to be who you are. But I interviewed that first time I'm with these people who most of them are doing, I mean, really and truly doing cutting edge things, science and the research they're doing, or they're orthopedic surgeons that are like leading the way in orthopedic surgery. And I'm looking around me and I'm smiling. I'm thinking, just enjoy this because you don't stand a chance. These are really amazing folks that I was getting to meet and interact with and that were interviewing as well. And I didn't get selected the first time. And when I found out that I wasn't selected, the head of the astronaut office was the one who told me that in person at Kennedy Space Center, because they were there for a meeting. And he offered me a job at Johnson Space Center and wanted me to get some operations experience. They wanted me to get some operations experience. Then they'd like me to interview or, apply again. And I remember while I was trying not to cry as he's telling me I didn't get selected, I remember thinking in my head, operations experience, what do they mean? I've been working in space shuttle operations for 10 years or 8 years at that point. What are they talking about? And I took this job at Johnson Space Center as a flight engineer on the shuttle training aircraft, which is that modified Gulfstream jet that we used to have that would basically dive straight at the ground like the shuttle did to train the astronauts how to land the space shuttle. And from the second I took that job, I knew what they meant. They want to know, how are you going to work as a crew in a complex operational setting? Was the best thing that happened to me. 2 years later, I interviewed again and got selected.
Well, congratulations. That's pretty amazing. So you spent a total of 104 days in space, and you've flown the space shuttle to and from. You were the last person to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, I was the last person to fly the space shuttle to and from my space station mission. Right. After that, it was all on the Soyuz. But up to that point, there were parallel. We were flying with the Russians on the Soyuz spacecraft, getting crew members to and from station, as well as on the space shuttle. I just happened to have that last flight on the shuttle to and from the station.
As you're sitting waiting to have your first trip into space, what kind of stuff goes through your mind? You're sitting on the launch pad, strapped in on top of this enormous, powerful set of engines to take you to a place that very few people in the experience of humanity have ever been. What's that like?
I think there's a mix of feelings, honestly. I think the first one for me really was like a gratitude, that, just kind of like how your life flashes in terms of what got me to the point of getting strapped into the seat. You're trying to think about all those people and the experiences and stuff, and just be thankful for that, because it's like everything. You don't do any of these things on your own, really. So you're just trying to be thankful for it. I think there's an anxiousness that you're feeling, not so much a fear or kind of anxiousness, but a really, what's this going to be like? I've trained so long for this. What is 7 million pounds of rocket engine exploding below me going to feel like? What is that going to feel like? How cool is it going to be to finally get to space and float and have that feeling and do the work that is so important up there? And you're ready because you've trained so much and I think why the fear isn't there is the people that have helped get the vehicle ready. You have trained so much for all these things that we think and that we know can go wrong, that you feel like you're ready to deal with whatever is humanly possible to deal with. So there's that. But I also remember feeling, if there was any fear or worry, it was for my family who was watching me do this, and my friends. And because I watch people that I consider to be family and that are my friends do it. And that anxiousness is a very different one. When you're that person, it's much more difficult to be the family and friend watching somebody strap in than it is to be the person strapping in. So
what did it feel like when you're finally lifting off and you're headed into space?
I think we're both of an age where we remember the like e-ticket ride at Disney World, where you had to actually have the actual ticket. I don't know what the letters are, or the combination ZZZ maybe or something is what the space shuttle was like. And, you're out there a couple hours in advance of the actual liftoff, and you're strapped in and you get really comfortable. I mean, I remember getting all my stuff situated and then napping for a little while because it was just so peaceful and comfortable. And it really isn't until about like 20 minutes before liftoff that the crew gets actively involved with the countdown activities. And so you're really pretty chill. And then it starts, getting closer. And I think it's at that 10, 9, 8 point where you're like, oh my gosh, we might actually go to space today. And, countdown starts going and the audio, the comms picks up a little bit and stuff. And on the space shuttle, when you got to the 6-second point, that's when all of that fuel, the big orange tank on the space shuttle was just liquid oxygen and hydrogen that was going to feed those 3 little engines on the back of the orbiter. And so at 6 seconds is when all that fuel started flowing to those engines. And I always thought, oh, that'll be really, kind of a really dynamic thing to have happen. But it wasn't. It was interesting. It was like this rumbly feeling and sound. And you got this movement, like this pitch, like you moved forward. You felt yourself, because you're up at the very tip of that rocket, right? You felt yourself kind of move forward, I don't know, about 6 or 10 feet. And that's because the engines are at an angle on the back of the orbiter. So when all of that starts happening, the whole thing pitches. And then beautifully, perfectly timed so that when you're straight up again, and NASA called that the twang maneuver. It's kind of the technical term. So when that twang got you back vertical, that was perfectly synced with the 0 on the countdown. And that's when those big white solid rocket boosters lit. And that's what, it was like you got hit from behind, you got hit from the front. It started to feel like 3 of you are sitting on top of you, shaking like I've never imagined my body could shake, just like your insides are like jello. And it was loud, but not in a way where you were like, oh, my ears, it's loud. It was just, you knew it was loud around you. And oh my gosh, you wondered if you'd ever been on a launch pad. And you just knew you were going someplace fast and you hoped you were going the right way. And your whole job at that point was just to monitor the screens and the displays to see, am I going the right way? Is everything behaving properly? And really in that first 90 seconds, there wasn't a whole lot the crew could do anyway about anything except for monitor stuff and stay in touch with the ground, which I think in hindsight it's such a great thing because as a human being, you have to respond to all this energy that's kind of coming through you. And you want to do it. You want to do it professionally. So it's like the little high five to your crew member next to you and the smile comes across your face like you can't control it. It just happens. And you want the woohoo, like you want to like just scream woohoo, and yet you're like, hey, woohoo, because it's got to be professional. And it's so helpful to just let that out and then to just get back to the job of monitoring and controlling the shuttle. And incredible, 2 minutes goes by and those big boosters would separate and then all the shaking stops. But you still feel like there's 3 of you on top of you because you're accelerating at, with a load of like 3 times the force of gravity on you through your chest. And then another 6 minutes, 6.5 minutes, and that big orange tank separates, another big bang, big flash, and then you are in space. Like from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in 8.5 minutes. And circling the planet.
This is remarkable. Now you described what it's like to feel that all coming to fruition as you blast off. You've been through simulations and all sorts of informational sessions. Were you prepared for that? I mean, had you been in a simulation that was precisely like that, or was this just a world apart?
It's, there's a lot of on-the-job training. Well, I'll just tell you that, or on-the-job experience of what it's going to be like. But I felt absolutely prepared. I think back on that now, and I think about whether it's the simulators we have or the almost like the classroom training sessions we have on the systems, and the training about just how to work as a crew and engage with the checklist, and to be able to back each other up and all those kinds of things. How incredible that is, how beautiful really it is that the training we do, which in reality just can't be, at least at this point, is not like what the actual launch feels like, but that you're ready to deal with it, absolutely ready to deal with it. And that's why I mean, I have such hope and know that as human beings, we'll be able to do even more incredible things, because we figure out ways. And it's one of the things I loved best about my training, and one of my mentors that actually encouraged me to pick up that pen, Jay Honeycutt. His motto, and I consider it the motto of all space program, is, here's how we can, not why we can't. And it's amazing what can happen when you apply that simple kind of sentiment to anything, dealing with a lawyer or figuring out how to launch space shuttles. It really, really works.
I agree. That's really transformative. And I grew up in the space program as well, because my father was president of ILC Industries, which made the spacesuits.
Yeah.
But his favorite saying was, the difficult takes a while, the impossible just takes a while longer.
Yeah.
And that was the attitude, right? It's you just have to, you can see things that you never thought you'd see in your lifetime if you can apply that in some ways. And it doesn't work for everything, but it works for a lot.
Yeah.
So you're up there now. What's it like in transitioning from the shuttle to the International Space Station? Is that a difficult maneuver?
It was, well, of course, physically what we do, and I like to share this because I think a lot of people, don't really understand this, is that you've got this rocket ship, the space shuttle, gets up to space, and you have this ginormous space station that's there already orbiting the planet in space. And these two things come together. So, the space shuttle, we do this whole maneuver where we fly up to the station and then, get in this position where we essentially back in and dock with one of the modules on the space station. And then, you have these two hatches that you have to prepare and then get open. And then it's like you've moved from the interior volume of the space shuttle, which is relatively small, but from a spaceship standpoint is actually quite large when you compare it to a capsule, craft. And then you open this hatch, and it's almost like the Grand Canyon opens up in front of you. It's just huge. I mean, the space station itself, there's these, like 10 or more modules all connected, and you can take advantage of the whole interior volume. You're not just limited to your feet on the floor. And so it becomes much bigger when you look at something that way and know that you can just push gently off a handrail or the surface and float up and fly around it and use all of the space, not just what's available to you in your kind of immediate surroundings on the deck or the floor of the station. And it's a little disorienting at first because you're taking yourself kind of from this smaller volume where you can move around and pretty much touch anything to get yourself to move, to this larger volume where you might get yourself in a situation where you're floating out in the middle and you can't reach anything to move yourself around. And that's kind of cool. But our brains and our bodies, it's just amazing how we adapt very quickly to new environments, in both a good and a not so good way. Like in a good way where you eventually actually quickly learn how to gracefully move in 3 dimensions. And then the not so good way is that our brain and our bodies figure out, I don't need these bones or muscles anymore, to work and move around up here. So I'm not going to waste any energy maintaining them. And so we very quickly go into like an accelerated kind of osteoporosis and muscles, just going away. And so we have to counteract that with, 2 hours of exercise each day and the kind of food we eat and, things that we do to take care of ourselves so we can come back healthy here to Earth.
Oh, once again,
Yeah.
this is a perfect life lesson for all of us.
Yes.
There are people who are living in much larger circumstances, even though they feel confined as we speak now,
Yep.
who say, well, I can't really exercise, I can't go to the gym, or I can't go run the way I did or ride my bike. But there's a lot we can do, even in a confined space. And you had to do it 2 hours a day.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the, it's one of the lessons just from kind of a direct lesson from living in space too. I mean, everything we're doing up there, we're trying to figure out how, in the way that we learn how our body reacts to this microgravity environment where we're floating and we don't need bones or muscles anymore, the countermeasure to that, how does that apply to our lives on Earth too? And I mean, in the simplest way for me, it was like, holy moly, gravity, just one gravity, just what our bodies experience here on Earth. And I can tell you, after you come home from space and you realize that load on yourself again, you realize, man, this whole thing about just get off the couch a couple times a day and move around and use your own body weight it's a lot of work to do that. And we just get so used to it. We don't think that, getting up and moving around is a big deal. It's a big deal. And I would say psychologically, it's a big deal too, to not just get trapped in your seat, in front of your computer, in front of your TV, and even in front of your book. You need to, there's a healthy aspect, both physically and psychologically, to getting up and just moving around. And that's whether that's in the interior volume of your apartment or house or, your hotel room, wherever you are in this time. And if you can get outside, you go outside because nothing beats the fresh air. Nothing beats it. And I can tell you that from living on a space station.
I'm sure. So when you live in an extended period in a situation like that, you're in close quarters with people. The closest of quarters with people for a long time. There's nowhere to go to get away from the people you're with. And so I imagine there's some psychological pressures as well. As professional and as wonderful as everyone is, for any human beings to be in that setting must be a different experience.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why most of our training, even if it's for an emergency or it's how you're going to prepare food on the space station or it's just a day in the life of, on the space station. All of it really, in one way or another, is about how you're going to work as a team with your crewmates, right? It's very deliberately built into it. I mean, we even go off and do what we call expeditionary training, where we go live, underwater for a couple weeks at a time with our crew, or people that we're training with, or we go out to the Utah Canyon lands. And while that is a ginormously wide open space, you are isolated when you're only 6 people out and you don't see other human beings in that time frame. And so you learn about your own strengths. More importantly, maybe you learn about your own weaknesses and have to accept that you have them, which a lot of us struggle with that. And how you're going to take best advantage of the skills, the expertise, the strengths of all your crewmates to really have a successful mission. And success in your mission is, happily getting along too. There should be a joy associated with living in space for, extended period of time with these people. And you figure out how to do it. I think what we might, struggle with down here is that even as a family, you know each other really well, right? But you don't. It's kind of like we have kids and there's no manual, right? It's nothing prepares you for how to manage yourselves when you're confined a little bit more. And I'm hopeful that we're through this we're learning more about how even afterwards we can take advantage of these lessons too. And But I think, on the space station, one of the things we knew from our training was that, everybody's going to have a bad day now and then. And we've got to be willing to tell each other, hey, I'm just having a bad day today. Or we need to be able to recognize in our crewmates, okay, Bill's just not, he's not, I don't know if it was, if he didn't sleep well, what it is, but you kind of, like you do with your family, develop an understanding of what's kind of the normal for that person. And you have to be willing to acknowledge it. And everybody has to be willing to be acknowledged. If you're the one having the bad day, you have to accept that somebody might tell you, it seems like you're having a bad day. Are you okay? And on the station, it was funny too, because it's not a huge space, but it's, in the grand scheme of living in space, it's a huge space. And we would joke, okay, I'm going to go to Europe for a little while and hang out down there, because, you had the Columbus, the European module, or you had the GEM, the Japanese exploration or experiment module, which is, we'd say, okay, I'm going to go to Japan for a little while or whatever. It's like, it's like you could travel from country to country just by moving yourself to another module. But yeah, I'm rambling. Sorry.
No, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. I don't want to ever cut you off. Now, everyone talks about how when you see Earth from up there, you see things in a completely different way. And we know this intellectually. We've seen photographs. We've seen, extraordinary images, and we have descriptions from people. But what's it like to actually experience that? That's got to be something that's a world different.
Yeah. I'll tell you, there's a couple words that come to mind, and that's, awesome and surreal. Both of those words I know get overused in so many ways. I overuse them even, but they totally apply. I mean, just totally apply to that experience, just the whole experience of being there, not just looking out the window, but, my husband, when I first got there and I was trying to describe, what I was seeing out the window, how I was, how we don't just see things, we feel them too when we actually have that experience. And he said something, I think you're developing a better understanding of the word awe, just really getting it. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably it. And, and then when I had described it to my son, who was 7 years old at the time, just the looking out the window part of it and seeing Earth, I was like, yeah, Rome, imagine the brightest light bulb you've ever seen, and now you've just splattered it with all the colors that Earth to be. And so there's going to be a lot of blue in there, but you splattered it with all the colors Earth to be, and you turn it on, and you almost, you almost can't look at it because it's just so bright, and your eyes have to adjust to how it glows. And just in my mind, I was thinking like the iridescence, the translucence of it against the blackest black, crystal clear black you've ever seen. And that's what it was like. And that's what it was like every time, you looked out the window. And people say, oh, well, the first time you looked out the window, where were you? What did you see? And I was like, well, I was on the space shuttle, but I have no idea where over the planet we were. I don't remember if it was water. It was likely water, because that's, you could wager any time when I look out the window, yep, it's either going to be water or had been water. But I don't know where it was. I just remember being like stunned by how stunning it was, just overwhelmingly, impressively more beautiful than I had ever imagined. And I imagined it to be, pretty impressive. And it never got old. I mean, to look at Earth, to be separated in a way I, likely never will be again, though I always hold hope that there could be opportunities to go back. And feeling more connected to everything and everyone below me, through this view that I was blessed to have, quite honestly. And being surprised by it every time I looked out the window, never wanting to pull the shade down, to watch the movie, because the art and the show was out that window. Just incredible.
So you're an artist, and you had an experience in space that no one had ever had before with art. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I had the opportunity to paint in space and excuse me, to with watercolors, which was really fun. And again, in hindsight, didn't really think about it before I went, other than I knew these watercolors would be allowed. They were watercolors. They were not toxic in any way, so they'd let me take them. And that, when I think about it, it's like, wow, that's one of those things that we do that kind of puts the human in human spaceflight. Bringing something that you enjoy doing from Earth to space with you. When you go to space, you're really all you're thinking about is the work that you're going to do there, that you're going to be working in space for whatever amount of time. And I'm very thankful to a friend and one of my flight crew equipment people on the ground, Mary Jane Anderson. Before I was getting ready to fly, she was the person that helped me make sure I had everything that I was going to take with me organized, as well as she was the one who made sure I had the one pair of pants for the 3 months and the however many t-shirts and pairs of underwear and toothpaste, all that kind of stuff too. I mean, really vital to our survival on the station. And when we went to station on a space shuttle, you had kind of like a large toiletry kit sized bag that you could bring personal stuff with you as long as it was okay, that it was safe to bring. And she reminded me, she's like, Nicole, you're going to be living there for months. You should bring something that you enjoy doing down on Earth. You should take that with you to space. And that's when I thought about the watercolor kit. And I mean, I am so thankful to her because that one painting that I did while I was in space, after retiring from NASA, after my second mission, and then, later making the decision to retire, that one painting has been the inspiration for everything I've done since then. Whether it's, yeah.
Tell us about the mechanics, though. I mean, we say, okay, watercolors, but doing that in zero gravity is a very different deal, right?
Yeah, and I really didn't think about it before going. I just thought, oh, I'd like to do this. And then when you get to the task of doing it, it's like, wow, yeah, I'm not going to fill a cup up with water and dip my brush in it. I'm going to squeeze little balls of water out and, touch my brush to those. And like everything you do in microgravity, you've got to keep track of your stuff. That's the most difficult thing in space, living there, is that everything floats, including you. So you have to have a plan for where you're going to stick stuff or have it while you're working on it. And so I got my little work area, my little studio set up outside my crew compartment. And yeah, it was really fun. You can't paint in front of the window. There's no plein air painting in space because you're traveling at 5 miles a second. So whatever you were going to paint that's out the window is gone before you can get your brush to the paper. And the whole kind of physics of it in a different way were interesting to me too, because like I'd squirt that little ball of water out, right? Little tiny ball of water. And then I'd take the brush to dip it in the ball of water. And like right before the brush got to the tip of the water, it's like the water wanted to move on the end of the brush. And then I remember looking at it like, oh my gosh, look at that, this little floating ball of water on the end of the brush. And I would take that down to the paint. And right before it got to the paint, which was these solid paints, kind of like kid ones, it's like the paint sucked the ball of water off the brush. And then the same thing back, the colored water from the paint back to the brush. It was the coolest thing to see. And if I had activated my brain cells, I would have videotaped this whole thing, but I never did. I have one picture of painting in space. And, then like just being kind of, I guess, in awe again of, oh my gosh, look, everything about it was a little bit different, and then taking the colored ball of water to the paper and realizing that, oh no, if I touch the brush to the paper just sucked up all the colored water at one time. So to paint, what I really ended up doing was kind of dragging the ball of water, colored water, along the paper instead of ever touching the brush to it. And it was just the neatest thing to do. And yeah, everything about it, I think, in one little video that I could have done would have explained what it was like to live in space too.
It's spectacular. Did the little balls, the colored balls of water, drift away during this process, or were you able to control that?
They would if you didn't control it. I mean, you could get a little wacky with it. I tried not to because then maybe no one else would ever be allowed to paint in space again. I wanted to make sure this was something that we could do again in the future. And yeah, so I tried to be very deliberate and controlled about it. But somebody had said to me at one point, "Oh, Nicole, I think you're the first person to have painted in space." And I'm like, "Oh, no, no, no. I don't want to claim that because there's so many things that have gone on in space, artistically too, not just from like a technical standpoint, that have happened that unless you deliberately go to find out about it, you might not know." So, astronauts and cosmonauts have been doing art in space since the very beginning. Alexei Leonov brought up colored pencils and did these beautiful orbital sunrise sketches. And then during Apollo-Soyuz, he did portraits of all of the crewmates, both the U.S. and Soviet crewmates at the time. And there have been there are right now on the station, there's a keyboard and a flute and a guitar. And then we, fashioned drums out of the solid waste collection, canisters and things. And I don't know, Don Pettit brought up a didgeridoo, right? I never say that right. And then Kjell Lindgren had bagpipes. I mean, you got to love your crewmate to let him play bagpipes on the station, and stuff like that. So this side of things has always been there. And I later discovered that my colleague, Richard Garriott, who flew to station as a spaceflight participant, he was there for 10 or 12 days, and he brought up acrylic paints with him. And he had flown before me, and his whole idea was not so much to paint, but to see how paint would behave in space, because he did these educational outreach things. And so he made this little plastic box, and he put up paper on the sides of the box, and then he just squirted the paints inside of the box and let the paint do their thing. Very Jackson Pollock, I think, way to. And so I don't know if anybody ever painted before him, but I think of Richard's work with that as like the first painting in space. But it's very human to do these things, to realize that you're living there, not just working there,
Right. And we can produce art even in confined circumstances, places we never thought without even gravity on our side. It's possible to produce art. So I think we should be inspired by that. Now, you said this changed the course of your life, and thanks to you, I'm aware of and got involved in the Space for Art Foundation. I'm hoping you can tell us a bit about that wonderful venture.
Yeah, absolutely. My goal with the art, my initial goal was, okay, I'm going to use my artwork to share this spaceflight experience with as many people as I can. Because one of the things that I had, seen through my whole NASA experience was that we don't do a really great job communicating with the audiences that don't already know about NASA, don't already know and love space exploration, right? So I'm like, yeah, art is just it's like a universal communicator. You can talk to anybody about anything if you use art, right? So that was my goal. And I've done that. I do that. But I was introduced to a gentleman named Ian Sion, who was the founder and director of the Art and Medicine program with kids at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And a friend of mine at Johnson Space Center, Gordon Andrews, who's one of the program communication people there in Houston, introduced us. And trying to make the long story short here. So Ian always with the kids in the pediatric cancer center there, had always done projects where he would take the kids' individual artwork and then create some larger format project out of it. So the kids knew that their art was going to be part of something bigger, and he did this really amazing dragon, like 20-foot long, 10-foot tall dragon at where each scale was a piece of the kids' artwork. It was incredible. And he did these murals and buses and all these kinds of things. He wanted to do something with space. And we joke about it now because Ian's original idea when he came to Gordo was, I'd like to be the artist in residence on the space station. And we had to talk Ian down because at that point I wanted to be the artist. And I, just joking, but we're not ready. It's just not, that's not going to happen like right away. So we decided that we would do something space related, and Ian came up, when we gave him some ideas, and came up with like, okay, we'll do these spacesuits. And I have one, like the flat version of one behind me here, but to your relationship with space through your dad, with ILC and stuff too. It's like, it's so small world, isn't it? That Ian went and visited the folks that make the spacesuits, take care of the spacesuits, and one of the gentlemen there, David Graziosi, who's like the senior engineer at the facility in Houston that does the suits, became very interested in the program and offered up that ILC, after speaking to his management, would help us create these art spacesuits. And so all of the work that we started doing with the kids just there at the one hospital in Houston, ILC took the individual pieces of fabric art that the kids had painted on and created the first art suit, which was called Hope. And then we did another one called Unity. That's the one back here. And we went from one hospital to like 10 hospitals, and 10 hospitals around the world, where Unity is based on, the theme was the relationship that we already have with the International Space Station program, with, these 15 different countries that we work with. And so we traveled to Japan and Europe and Canada and Russia, and then here in Houston, and painted with kids in the hospitals there. And ILC Dover sewed together, again, this beautiful suit Unity. It traveled to and from the space station. And we did this amazing video conference with kids all around the world who could see their artwork together on this suit, being worn by astronaut Jack Fisher on the space station, doing this crew video conference. It was incredible. And these suits have just, I don't know, they've kind of taken on a life of their own. We have partners in Russia now that are working on projects with Zvezda, who is kind of the counterpart, I think, to ILC, and that they make the suits for the Russian space program. We have astronauts and cosmonauts from all over the world participating with us, but we've grown to where our last suit, Exploration, which ILC again created for us, was built with the artwork from kids in hospitals and refugee centers in over 45 countries around the world. And our next project that we just announced, Beyond, we're looking for artwork from kids across the planet. And we realize that now this isn't just about children in isolation in hospitals and refugee centers, though we will still be reaching out to them as well. Right now in the situation that we have, kind of this global isolation that's going on, everybody's self-isolating. We're opening up Beyond to kids everywhere. We just want kids from all over the world to send us pictures of their artwork, and we'll incorporate it into our next project.
How many individual pieces of art are in the suit behind you? In Unity, for example, how many different children contributed to that?
I would say Unity has over 1,000 pieces. If you can see it, let me see if hang on a second. I'll bring a little version over. We have all these little flat versions of it. But if you can see it, let's see if I can get the light right. The individual triangles that are in the suit, each of those is an individual painting. And there's easily over 1,000 pieces sewn together. And I will tell you, Gary, who was the main guy at ILC who sewed this together, said very nicely to us, never again will there be triangles. So way to build out the pattern, because they had to figure out a way to take all these triangles and then map them to the pattern pieces of the suit to be able to do it. The craftsmanship in this is really, really really amazing the way it is. And so it's so in this, easily over 1,000 pieces of artwork, so 1,000, kids probably participating. I think in our file right now, we have a little over 3,000 pieces of artwork from the different projects that we've done, and we're looking for more. We're looking for more. And I'll tell you, you bring the inspiration of space exploration together with like the healing power of art. I mean, that's what Space for Art Foundation is really all about. At the simplest level, space-themed art therapy projects. But it's so much bigger than that, I think. It's for these kids in these hospitals and refugee centers, and now I would say, for kids that are, trying to deal with this in whatever way around the world, there's a very transcendent role that art has, that knowing their art will be part of something bigger has. It allows them to think about their future. It allows them to take themselves out of this experience that's maybe not so happy going on at the given time and see past it. And that's a good thing. Yeah.
Nicole, thank you very much for explaining all this to us. The Space for Art Foundation is a wonderful culmination of all your great work, and I can see it moving forward as it incorporates more and more children and people from around the world and really brings us together on a level that is very beautiful. And thank you for your practical hints as well for all of us living during this very difficult time for us, but I think we see it in better perspective now when we have your view, and I appreciate your sharing it with our audience.
Well, thank you. I mean, I hope everybody will take the time to get up, move around, look out the window, appreciate, what's around you in a new way. I mean, that's what happens in space. And, come out of this as a crew member, Spaceship Earth.
We'll do that. Thank you, Nicole. And
Thank you.
Take care. Be well.
You too. You too. Appreciate you having me here.